Welcome to my review of the domains and kingdoms of living things. You may recall from my previous video that scientists sort organisms into orderly groups using the 8 levels of classification: domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. All living things are sorted into one of 3 domains: archaea, bacteria, or eukarya. Organisms in archaea are ancient bacteria that live in extreme environments. Organisms in bacteria are the bacteria that live everywhere else. Organisms in eukarya have nuclei in their cells. You can then break those groups into smaller groups called kingdoms. There are 6 kingdoms: Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. The domains archaea and bacteria do not break into smaller groups. They're simply renamed at the kingdom level of classification. Archaea becomes Archaebacteria, and bacteria becomes Eubacteria. The domain Eukarya contains more organisms than either of the others, therefore it can be broken into 4 smaller groups: Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia. It's important to remember that scientific discoveries happen daily, and that this system of classification can change. For example, when I was in life science, there were no domains, and the kingdoms Archaebacteria and Eubacteria were combined into one, called Monera. Let's look at each kingdom one characteristic at a time. You may recall that prokaryotes are organisms that have no nuclei in their cells, no membrane-covered organelles, and circular DNA. You may also recall that eukaryotes are organisms that have nuclei in their cells, membrane-covered organelles, and linear DNA. Archaebacteria and Eubacteria are prokaryotic, and Protista, fungi, plantae, and Animalia are eukaryotic. As you've already learned, organisms can be unicellular or multicellular. Archaebacteria and Eubacteria are unicellular, Protista are mostly unicellular, fungi are mostly multicellular, and plantae and Animalia are multicellular. A cell wall is a rigid layer that surrounds some cells, which provides structural support and protection. Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, fungi, and plantae all have cell walls. Protista sometimes have cell walls, and Animalia doesn't have them at all. Organisms can reproduce asexually or sexually. Asexual reproduction is when one parent produces offspring that are identical to itself, sort of like a copy. Sexual reproduction is when 2 parents combine DNA through sex cells and produce offspring that have a mixture of the parents' traits. Archaebacteria and Eubacteria reproduce asexually, Animalia reproduces sexually, and Protista, fungi, and plantae use both methods. Time for some new vocabulary words. Autotrophs are organisms that make their own food. Heterotrophs are organisms that get food from sources outside of themselves. Plantae are autotrophs, fungi and Animalia are heterotrophs, and Archaebacteria, Eubacteria, and Protista can be either autotrophs or heterotrophs. This characteristic is closely linked to the one we just covered, but it's more specific. Producers are organisms that make their own food, the exact same definition as autotroph. Consumers are organisms that eat other organisms. Decomposers are organisms that break down dead or decaying organisms. Plantae are all producers, Animalia are consumers, and fungi are decomposers. Archaebacteria and Eubacteria can be producers or decomposers, and Protista could be any of those 3. Archaebacteria live in extreme environments like deep sea vents and hot springs. Eubacteria live pretty much everywhere else. Protista are mostly aquatic, meaning they live in water, and fungi, plantae, and Animalia can live on land or in water.
Created using Powtoon.